Hello and welcome to another special interview episode from the All About the Balls Sports Podcast. My name is Ollie, and for those who have been listening for a while, you will remember this friend of the show who is joining me, our NRL expert from down in Australia. Josh, mate, are you there?
Yes, hello Ollie, how are you?
Mate, I am good. That question has taken on a whole new kind of meaning with the last few months of lockdown, hasn't it? It's like, well, in many ways it's terrible, but actually I'm okay.
I'm doing my best.
I'm doing my best. I'm struggling on. But how are you? How's things?
Yes, well, as I just said, I'm doing my best. No, I'm good. I'm one of the lucky people. Can still work, can still do all those things from home. So that's been good. Obviously it's been a tough time for everyone. So hopefully everyone's doing all right. But other than that, I'm excited because the football comes back in 2 days. So very happy.
Yes, and then this is the whole focus of our conversation today. So the NRL, the rugby league down in Australia, has fought very, very hard, and we'll come on to that in a little bit. But it's like I say, the season is back up and running in 2 days' time.
Yes, they finally were able to convince the right people to allow football to come back, and they've eased restrictions. And yeah, so on Thursday night in Australia time, they'll kick off again with the Broncos and the Eels. So it's a pretty incredible story. Whole year in general for the world. So.
Yeah, and you know what? It's interesting because not only is one of the Australian sort of major sports back, but it's one of the first major sports leagues around the world to really come back. And I know the German football league, the Bundesliga, has started up about 2 weeks ago, I think it was, and there's a few other sort of other leagues around the world. But this is one of the first sort of major sports leagues to come back. So let's go back in time a little bit, because when we last spoke, it was early April, and I think had lockdown started down there, or was it just about to start, or I can't quite remember.
We had just gone into some pretty hardcore lockdown measures. It was around about the same time Australia just pretty much closed.
Yeah.
So
the competition has been on hold for best part of 2 months, really. And so what's been going on during those 2 months what's been happening within the sport? Is it shut down completely, or any kind of games behind closed doors, or?
Yep, so we've had zero games in any sport in Australia and zero training sessions for most sports up until about 2-3 weeks ago. So just, pretty much May 11, I think, or around that time is when things started to slowly pick up for Australia. But professional sport-wise, nothing until May, I think it was 3rd or 4th, when the NRL went back to training. But the Adelaide Crows in the AFL broke some rules and trained without permission and got in trouble. But, there's been a bit of that. But other like sanctioned training, nothing since – nothing from the time it all closed until early May. So there was a bit of a break.
And so what I guess the big thing I'm kind of interested to understand is, like, how has the NRL been able to get back up and running what seems like relatively quickly? Like I say, because over here you've got, the major sports like the Premier League. They have started getting back into some small training groups, I think, in the last week or so. The Premier League Rugby have said that they're really not sure how they're going to get back up and running. They're going to need at least, like, I think, stories between 4 to 8 weeks of sort of pre-season training before they can get back on a pitch. So how has the NRL managed to do this? Like, what's it been through?
Oh, what hasn't it been through? So just in the times as well I spoke, the CEO stood down and quit, and so did one of the financial officers. And now we've got so Todd Greenberg, whether he's pushed or decided to leave, it's pretty clear that he was told to go. But he was in a bit of a stoush with key stakeholders, one of those potentially being the clubs. So he basically was moved on just suddenly a few weeks into the coronavirus stuff going down, and then ever since then, it's just been Peter V'landys, the Australian Rugby League Commission chair, has just been an absolute bulldog when it came to governments, including the Australian and New Zealand federal governments, to get the Warriors involved. So he's just been insane. He's copped some flack. He's copped some positive praise in the media. It's just been an absolute whirlwind. We've had players flouting the restrictions, going shooting and driving, and when they shouldn't have been on farms. We've had players getting on a big group of girls and going on TikTok. We've had CEOs standing down, and the networks threatening to completely walk away from the game. And a bit of toing and froing in the media, and the tax dogs and commentators imploding, and it just hasn't stopped. And today, Bronson Sherry from the Cronulla Sharks tested positive for steroids. So it's all happening.
Wow. I mean, this is it's like a soap opera. It is absolutely amazing.
Rugby league is wrestling. Like, rugby league is definitely wrestling for Australia.
Are other Australian sports like this as well, or is this mainly a rugby league sort of characteristic?
It seems to be a bit of a characteristic for rugby league, whether that's they just don't mind airing their dirty laundry and maybe other codes hide it a little bit better. I'm not sure, but it seems to be very much synonymous with your good old rugby league. Sometimes it's unfair, but sometimes they don't help themselves.
Sometimes it's absolutely appropriate. Yeah. So, I mean, on the Todd Greenberg thing, so I remember because he came from Clubland, didn't he? He was a CEO of a club before he got the big gig, wasn't he?
Yes, there's the CEO of the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs, and actually Rugby Union picked up Raelene Castle from the Bulldogs, so that's a bit of a tainted chalice. You come from Bulldogs, you probably don't go so well, but anyway.
Yeah.
Todd Greenberg, was sort of at odds with some of the clubs potentially. I guess you can never believe it all in full, but some of the stories that were coming out were saying that he was too invested in making the NRL profitable and sponsorship based, and a commercial business. And I think some of the clubs felt a little bit hard done by that. But in the same token, the game has never been stronger. It's never been making money, more money than it is now. So it's one of those things. But at the end of the day, clubs, I guess, by the sounds of it, wanted him gone, and eventually he did go. And it appears I don't know, again, you don't really want to speak ill of the dead, but it appears that he had spoken to Channel 7 when he shouldn't have, while Peter V'landys was negotiating some network deals. But that's, Peter V'landys himself didn't even comment too much on that. So make of it what you will. But that's some of the stories that have come out as to why the final straw, sort of, because he had till the end of the year, but then he was suddenly gone.
Yeah. So then on that one about the financial side, if reading into that, is that partly where the clubs aren't very good at financially managing themselves, and so what they didn't want was a head of the NRL who was putting a lot of pressure on them to be financially well managed?
Well, it's a bit of everything, because the NRL, it's kind of a weirdly set up system. They were making money, but at the same time they were spending a lot of that money. When we did go into the coronavirus crisis, it did look like it was a bit of strife for the game. Peter V'landys came out and said there were potentially 6 clubs to fold if we didn't get back this year. So it was actually pretty serious. I think when initially no one really knew it was going to happen, because I guess for 1 week we were all saying, this is a bit of a joke. I don't think it'll affect us too much in Australia. Then 2 weeks later, everyone's working from home and there's no professional sport anymore. So it sort of changed so quickly that people were a bit worried. So I think that fear also drove a little bit of the frustration from the clubs. Like, there are restrictions that they have that they can't make money, like, just free will. Like, I guess there's poker restrictions in some states and there's not in others, or so the pokie machines come into it. And some clubs are just better positioned financially in markets like Melbourne or Sydney than some of the more traditional clubs. So there's all of that sort of boils down into a very complex mess, and they just didn't think Todd Greenberg was spending enough in the right areas, like grassroots development and potentially clubs. But in saying that, they get a $13 million grant every year. So, it's one of those things like.
Yeah. So, okay. So, and you're saying there that V'landys was a little bit of a bulldozer. What are some of the things he's had to get done, or what are some of the sort of things that have come out where he's had to bulldoze through barriers to get the game kicking off on Thursday?
Well, that's probably the biggest understatement of it all. Is like I don't know how to describe just how human, like how insane this human has conducted himself in the media. He's just been open and honest. Like when it all started, he said we could lose the whole game, and then through the whole course, he's been out there in the media saying exactly what he's going to do. To a point where the networks tried to fight him and take him on. So basically, what needed to happen was Channel 9 and Fox Sports, both in Australia, hold the rights to the game, and they needed to sort that out. They needed to sort out if there was a chance of coming back and how they would come back. So whether they were looking at a bubble or if they were moving on to sort of locking down clubs and areas. Or whatever it was going to be. So we started there, and he decided that the bubble wasn't going to work in the end. There was just too much bad PR. There was just too much to go through. So they'd wait on their restrictions a little bit. So then the networks came to him and said, well, we want to renegotiate our deal to be a lot less because they don't consider the free-to-air sport or just live sport in general to be the same model due to the streaming. So so they had to then hit the trenches with the NRL and try and figure out what they were going to do without a clear start date in mind. So they tabled 4 scenarios. And Channel 9 were being quite difficult. They didn't like the scenarios and they thought that they were going to lose a lot of money. So he then had to spend basically a month trying to smooth that over. And at the same time, they had Channel 9 employees coming out. I think one of them was the entertainment director came out and said that rugby league might not even be part of the channel's future at the end of the broadcast deal. So it was just a bit of shit fighting, really. But that didn't really make any headway for a long time. But then about a month ago, things just started going bang, bang. So he came up with this idea that he would restart on the 28th of May, and he sent out Wayne Pearce, who was part of the Project Apollo team coming up with these scenarios, and said, yes, we'll be back on May 28th. So this is during all the time where people were like, no way, it's not going to happen. So he then sat Channel 9 and Fox Sports down and said, all right, we're coming back on the 28th, and you now have to put our product on the television. Stop threatening me with the contract. This is our contract.
Because I remember seeing that, like, there was just this bold announcement, like, we're back on the 28th, when there was just nothing in place at all. Like, it was almost like, build it and they will come. Just if we say and stick to the 28th, that's the thing we're just going to beat everyone over the head with because it's an immovable date.
And that's what it seemed like for such a long time. And so he did that. And they came to the party in the end, the Fox Sports and Channel 9, and just opened up the negotiations. And I think this is at the point where Channel 7 put out, were interviewed and weirdly said that they would be interested in the rights. But turns out apparently that might have been Todd Greenberg. But yeah, so essentially, over the last month, they've renegotiated the season to become a 20 round season. Mm-hmm. And that's obviously significantly down on the 25 rounds plus 4 weeks of finals. So they've got 20 rounds plus 4 weeks of finals now. And that was negotiated about a month ago. And so that was the first hurdle cleared, really. So the network said, okay, begrudgingly, we'll do this, but we're going to renegotiate the deal. The broadcast rights deal, and they have done that. So I think for an extra 3 years, it'll stay on Channel 9 and Fox Sports in Australia. Right. Yeah. But for a lot, it's not really clear yet, but it appears to be less money. But at the same time, Volandis has got a very clear idea of building his own digital network over the next few years. So we'll see how that plays out. But anyway, so he got that installed, and then he needed to convince the governments. So then he had to go to the federal government of Australia and say, we're coming back on the 28th. We need your support. What do you reckon? And they were trying to dodge and not say anything for a long time until Peter Volandis had to contact New Zealand and say, would you allow teams to come over there? And it was basically a flat no. So then he had to convince the federal government of Australia to allow the Warriors in with an exemption to just basically begin training when the time came. Yeah, there was radio silence for a long time, but lo and behold, our immigration minister approved it, and the Warriors were allowed back into a country town in New South Wales called Tamworth to start training again whenever that time came.
He's renegotiated 2 broadcast deals, got Australia to change its immigration policy, all within the space of a few weeks.
But it sort of seems like it. He's moved mountains in just a couple of weeks. So whole new broadcast deal, whole new exemptions for the Warriors. And then That
Is he going
was
to run
all.
for prime minister? Is he going to run for
Oh,
prime minister?
he
I mean,
should.
surely. I mean, he would get a decent percentage of the vote.
Oh, it just seems like he just knows exactly what he wants to achieve, doesn't he? And it's pretty
Mm.
refreshing to see a sports organisation
Yeah.
do that. Whether you love it or hate it, there's definitely a lot of haters here about it. But at the same time, it's quite impressive. And everyone was all happy Larry. They started configuring the draw, but this is where he got in trouble with some internal NRL people. He decided that we'd go, but so for about 10 years we've been running with two referees in the middle, if you controlling the game. So over in England
Mm-hmm.
and other countries, as an international level, it's one, but in Australia we've had two to control the ruck because it got very good. It's the Premier League of rugby league, so they needed more control. So the fans just don't understand refereeing, and the media doesn't help. There's a lot of bias against referees here. I guess I should say I'm very biased because I referee park football on Saturdays. But there's just a misunderstanding of some of the rules because it can be very interpretive. So it's one of the only sports in the world where not only do the referees have to control the game, but they basically play a key role. So they set the 10 meters. They police the infringements. They keep players safe. They do a lot. It's more than just, I guess, watching for a mistake. There's a lot more going on. So it's a pretty intricate role, and the fans, just whatever reason, can't understand that. So Peter V'landys came out just suddenly one day and said, all right, okay, we're going back to one referee for the rest of the year. But then the Referees Association weren't consulted, and so they're all full-time employees and they're at risk of losing their job. So they went to Fair Work Australia through their union rep to say, well, no, we want to renegotiate that, and instead of going to one referee, have two referees, and we'll talk about it at the end of the year. So they got right to the tribunal of Fair Work Australia.
Wow.
And eventually it was resolved. The full-time referees decided to withdraw the action, and at the end of the year there'll be a renegotiation. It appears that it's just been insane because the union didn't appear like they wanted to do that, but the full-time referees decided that. So effectively ruling out the specialist touch judge for professional NRL level.
Man, the V'landys is just literally. I've got this image of him just standing there with a ripped shirt, just shouting, "Come on!" Almost like the guy from 300. Like, this is Sparta. This is insane.
Basically, he's if you can imagine, he's a Better Call Saul looking dude. Like, he has dodgy lawyer written all over him. He looks like he looks like he can be a slam ball, but he just gets things done.
Yeah, man.
So it's been crazy.
So finally, the game is actually about to kick off. I mean, is there anything left that can get in the way? Like, of all the barriers been overcome? There's no last minute little things where suddenly actually the kit suppliers didn't sign up and didn't know the dates to deliver the kits to, or something like that.
Well, fun fact, actually, the New Zealand Warriors women's team forgot, I think it was their jerseys at the Nines in Perth earlier this year and had to play in the men's jerseys. But anyway, that's something else. No, I don't think so. The only thing that would stop the games going ahead would be an outbreak in the playing groups. That would be the only thing and that would only put a few fixtures on hold. So they have wiggle room by the looks. So the grand final's on October 25th now, so they could probably run a few extra months if they needed to. They're trying not to clash with the T20 World Cup, but I think they have a room for another break if need be. So I don't think really anything can stop them unless there's a widespread death in Australia and they have to go back into full lockdown. Which hopefully doesn't happen, not just for the rugby league point.
Yeah. And so you mentioned the schedule earlier, and it's all behind closed doors for now?
Up until round 9, at least.
Okay, cool. And are they still doing State of Origin?
Yes, so that's interesting as well. So that's been pushed back to postseason. So the grand final will be on the 25th of October, and then I think it's November 4th, Wednesday, November 4th, 11th, and 18th. So a 3-week series, basically, which will be a first. So usually they're played over 6-week blocks. So...
Well, Game 3 is just before my birthday then, so hopefully a New South Wales deciding victory on the 18th. That'd be fantastic. And is everyone kind of... I guess there must be plenty of people who are a bit, I guess, disappointed or concerned about the way the draws panned out and this new schedule. But in general, is everyone like, do you know what, we'd rather have this than no season at all?
Oh, to be fairly honest with you, I've actually seen no one complaining about
Oh,
any
really?
draws or anything like that. I think everyone's just happy to have it back. Players are happy to play. Fans are happy to cheer for it. Like, and everyone, you can't do anything. So, like, it's not like you're just being ruled out from going to the footy. So, and you can still watch it on TV. And arguably, it's a better product on TV anyway. You just go for the atmosphere. So,
Yeah. And the expensive beer. So okay. So round one, what should we be looking out for? What are some of the key matchups?
well, they've tried to sort of build a rivalry to start, a rivalry round in some ways to start, but I think you can't go past the Roosters versus Rabbitohs, the two foundation
Oh
clubs.
yes.
A lot of drama has surrounded these two fierce rivals, and the latest instalment is Latrell Mitchell leaves the Sydney Roosters in a bit of a huff and a puff and ends up at the Rabbitohs, and there's a bit of media chat. So, and Latrell was actually one of the ones, Latrell Mitchell and Josh Adokar from the Storm were the ones who were flouting some rules and social isolation. So it's just got big game written all over it. You've got the rumours about
Yeah.
is Latrell a fullback or not, and then you've got the traditional rivals coming up against each other. So it's going to be fascinating to watch. First game back.
And are they all? Sorry, just to cover this in a little bit more detail. But how are they doing? Like the stadiums and the travel and things like that. Like how have they set it up?
Oh, true. So they've sort of done a few stadiums. So they're using Suncorp Stadium in Brisbane, where the
Mhm.
Broncos and the Gold Coast Titans will play. They're using the new Queensland Country Bank Stadium in Townsville for the North Queensland, and obviously Amy Park for the Storm. But then in New South Wales, what they've actually done is set up three hubs, more or less. So you've got Bankwest Stadium in Sydney, which is Western Sydney. The Central Coast Stadium, 3 hours north of Sydney, and then Campbelltown, also West Sydney. So there's three stadiums they're going to be using. So they're all like suburban grounds
Mhm.
that don't have much option for fans anyway, just because they wanted it to be close and as real, authentic looking. But at the same time, they've based teams in to play their home games in those areas. So the Warriors, for example, play on the Central Coast, not New Zealand. But other than that, it would just be travel. So whether it's a isolated bus travel or chartered planes, which is what they were doing in round two, that's the plan at this stage. And then in round nine, round 10 onwards, it will be reconsidered. They'll have a look at restrictions and then make a decision.
And is it actually it's a random question for you because they played, was it 2 rounds or 3 rounds
Two.
before the lockdown? 2 rounds. And did the points from those 2 rounds count now for the rest of the season?
Yes, they will. So it's just a pause. So
Oh,
this will be round three.
yeah. Okay. Cool. And are there any, has your sort of predictions changed at all for who you think is going to come good come the end of the season in the finals?
Oh, probably a little bit. Everyone's had a chance to freshen up and get healed.
Hmm.
You go from some player so Sydney Roosters have come back from England playing the World Club Challenge, and you've got the Parramatta Eels on a high. So they're like two opposite scenarios. So you've got the Roosters who are already tired from playing limited preseason, going to play a hugely competitive game in England, to the Eels, who had a real full preseason after getting knocked out of the finals and then started really well. So
Mm.
all of a sudden, you've got Roosters who are coming off back-to-back premierships who are now fresh and have more players at their disposal, and the Eels no longer on momentum. So I just think suddenly you go back to quite an even competition because of the break.
Mm.
There's players who weren't meant to be back until around about this time anyway. But by this time, normally
Yeah.
it's around 11 to 12 to 13. So suddenly in round three, you've got a lot more names to choose from, and it just evens it out again. So I think clubs like Roosters, Storm, Broncos will really benefit. I think the Eels will still be good, for example, but I just think with all those fresh players, it could be a lot closer than it has been in previous years, because fatigue is huge in rugby league. I think, if you make it deep in the finals, there's a lot of history says that you started a little bit slower the next year. So
That's interesting. Yeah, that'd be really interesting to see how that goes. Are there any teams that had a really lost their first 2 rounds, so we're gonna like now be really struggling to make that kind of ground up?
I think I think in a way, if you've lost, effectively, if you lose the first two rounds, which a few clubs did, you've then also take into account the 5 rounds of the missing. So you're down by
Yeah,
74 in a way.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but I think the saving grace of that as well, it was quite a weird lopsided start. So you had Sharks, Roosters, Dragons, Bulldogs, Warriors, and Titans. All of them have 0 wins. So that's 11th to 16th. So there's still a bit of room to move.
Yeah,
But at the same time, with those extra games in hand, you've got the clubs at the top of the ladder who then can sort of, probably afford to start a bit slower coming out of these restrictions.
man,
It's
that's
going to be an
fantastic. And
interesting season all around. So it
yeah,
is hard
you
to
know
predict.
what? I remember you saying, because I remember you saying when we last spoke that I think at that point there'd been one or two rounds with no fans, and
Mm.
you'd said that actually the game was a little bit quicker. Maybe because players could hear the calls a little bit more, they could hear the ref a little bit easier, but actually there was a little bit more pace to the whole game.
Yeah,
So
100%.
yeah, it'd be interesting to see if that then continues.
Yeah, and but what really is interesting now is that whole dynamic has also changed. So now you're going back to one referee. So you've got
Yeah,
two. The game is 100% faster, and now you're coming back to one who arguably has more control, but sees less and will be a little bit slower because it's just him
yeah,
or
yeah,
her.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Because there's female referees too now, so him or her, like it's just going to be interesting. And saying that, there's really young referees now who are just going to get thrown into it, and they're going to have some of the greatest players. So usually the system is you ease them in, right? So you become an
Yeah.
assistant for a few seasons, and you get the control of the head referee scenario. But now you're going to get some players probably trying to take advantage of the
Oh,
younger ones because they've been so used
yeah.
to the system for the 10 years.
That's going to be
But anyway,
brutal.
who knows
That's
what's going to
going to be
happen? But
brutal.
I think the control of the game in one aspect of the 10-meter line and penalty consistency will be much better. But I think it might be a tad slower this time. But whether that's good or bad, who knows? Depends what you like.
Well, I mean, for those people in the UK who are listening to this and interested to know, Sky Sports over here are actually carrying the NRL. So I think the first game is Brisbane Broncos versus Parramatta Eels on Thursday, which is at 10:50 a.m. UK time, and you can watch the whole of the round, I think, on Sky Sports. So I'm definitely going to be tuning in. Josh, mate, thank you so much again. If you're keen and eager and haven't got a load of stuff going on, we'd love to catch up with you again in a few rounds maybe and see how the sort of the restarted season has panned out.
Yep, sounds good to me. I'm always happy to talk about it.
Man, that'd be fantastic. That'd be
If
fantastic.
you're in America, you can watch it too. Actually, that just came
Oh,
to me. If you're
really?
they're playing like 4 games in America on
Oh,
Fox Soccer
cool.
Plus. So if, I don't know if you're American and listening to it. All I know is it was a ridiculous time. So the Storm, the beloved Storm, playing the Raiders. I think it's on Friday, Sunday, or something like that at 5:30 a.m. in America.
Oh, well
So.
worth getting up for. Bacon sandwich in the NRL. Sounds fantastic. Josh, thank you so much, mate. Lovely to talk to you again. Speak to you again soon.
Sounds good, mate. Thank you.
Take care, buddy.